So it sounds like most of you seem to be kind of, you want to connect this invented language to some sort of imaginary world that you have, whether it's going to be part of a story or a novel, or again as part of role-playing games, or even video games, that kind of thing. Okay? So what I want to do with you for the next little while is show you how you might get started creating such a language, however big or small the language is going to be, so that it can provide some sort of consistency, some flavor to the imaginary world that you're starting. So if you take a look at the handout, okay, you'll see this little glyph that I have here. So kind of a tripod kind of thing with a spiral. Okay, I came up with this about 10 years ago. This is, I think this really captures for me what it is that linguists do when they're trying to describe a language. So so professionally, I'm a field linguist. I work with native languages of Utah. And when I work with these languages, I don't just look at phonology, I don't just look at the syntax, but I have to kind of keep all of these things in mind. So you'll notice that there are 3 prongs: meaning, sound, and structure. Okay, and all 3 of these things need to be there to create kind of a fully fleshed out language. And what I want to do with you today is kind of show you how you might go from one area to the next, letting decisions that you make in each of these areas inform decisions that you'll make later in other areas. Okay? So, the first activity, so if you look, the first activity is to create 200 words. So you can do that, or sorry, 20 words. Get cracking. You got 5 minutes. No, so you can either make up words for whatever language you want to make up yourself, or you can use one of these handy language starter packs that I passed out on the second handout. There are 8 of them, 4 on the front side, 4 on the back side. These are actually real languages. So, and if you're interested later, I can tell you what languages they are. But for now, if you want to create 20 words, great. If not, you want to just pick one of these starter packs to work with, that's fine too. Yeah?
Curious, do you know Navajo?
Do I know Navajo? Do I speak it? No. Okay, so now I'm kind of in an awkward place. I just told you we need to make up 20 words, but I'm not going to give you any time to do it. So maybe the best thing would be to just pick one of the starter packs and pick one you think looks kind of interesting. Okay? So here's the idea. If you've already started creating a language, and if you've already started writing your novel, and your characters already have names, you already have an idea of what you want your language to look and sound like. Okay? So what we're going to do with these 20 words, whether you've made them up yourself, or whether you're just taking one of the sets of 20 that I've already given you, what we want to do is try to figure out, so what makes those words, those names, kind of cohesive? What makes them consistent? What gives them the particular sound that you've kind of invested in? Okay? So when you think about languages that you've heard or languages that you know, we have these different kind of impressionistic attitudes about this language. So people talk about French as being a very beautiful sounding language, or about German as being harsh. We have these kinds of impressions. Well, what is it about those languages that make them, or about the language's sounds that make them that way? Okay? So what we're going to do now, I'm going to try it with, I looked at them, these are all just so much fun, but I'm going to look at number 7. Okay, number 7 is actually Tamil. A few years ago, I did a field methods class at BYU, and we had a Tamil speaker, and the whole purpose of the class was to figure out. It's from India, South India. So, and the purpose of the class is to teach students how to kind of discover things about a language from a native speaker, even if they don't know that language themselves. So, the way you ask questions, the way you organize the data, the way you analyze the data. So that year we did Tamil, and it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. Our consultant was a really good sport about all the silly questions we asked her. But anyway, so this is I just kind of quote this from my field notes from the notebook from that semester. Okay. So what we want to do is, as you look through that list, okay, so again, I'm looking at language 7. In principle, we could do any 8, but I'm just picking language 7, okay? As you look through the list, and you look at these words, you say, yeah, it all looks like they kind of belong to the same language. Okay? At least that's the impression I get as I look through that. So, yeah, that all looks like Tamil, and it all looks like Tamil. It has kind of this Tamil flavor to it. So what is it about the sounds of that language that give it that flavor? So if you look at now the other handout, let's see. I knew this was going to start again. There we go. Okay. So if you look at the first page of the handout, so I've given you space to write 20 words. Okay. And then underneath, I've given you a chart that you can use to kind of put the consonants there. Okay. Do we have an extra handout? No, sorry. I think there's someone back there. I guess next year I'll have to make 60. Of course, if I make 60, then only 20. That's the way it is. All right, so, but if you look at this chart at the bottom of the first page, okay, it's organized by how we produce sounds in the mouth. All right, so the columns in the chart indicate different places in the mouth that we can articulate consonants. Okay, so I start on the left side with the lips. Then we move to the tongue. There are 3 parts of the tongue that we use. So the tip of the tongue, the blade of the tongue, which is just behind the tip of the tongue, and then the body of the tongue. Okay, so which is kind of big, humpy part in the middle, and the back of the tongue. Okay, and then the throat. Okay, these are not technical terms. I debated whether I should use technical terms or not. And I thought, nah, why bother? We'll just use these terms because they're a lot more illustrative of the kinds of sounds we use. Now, the rows are headed by technical terms that linguists use. Okay? So stopped. That is a sound where the airflow stops completely and then is quickly released. Okay, so sounds like a P or a T or a K we refer to as stops. Okay? Next one is fricative. These are sounds that are produced with a lot of turbulence in the airflow. Okay, so if I were to make an S, okay, a very turbulent, noisy sound. Then we have other sounds that are like, maybe not quite as noisy as an S, but they have that same property. They create a lot of noisy airflow. We call these fricatives. In affricate is really just a stop and a fricative smushed together. So the sound we have in English like this is ch. Okay? Other languages have other sounds as well as ch. So the languages I work on, Shoshone and Ute, also have s as an affricate, so like a T and an S kind of jammed together. Okay? And one of the varieties of Shoshone that I look at also has th. It's like a T and a TH all kind of stuck together. So we can have affricates in different places as well. Okay? The nasal, liquid, glide, these are sounds that we call sonorants. These are sounds that have just a lot of air moves. They're kind of loud, buzzy sound. Kind of sounds like okay. So these are sounds that carry a lot of intensity. Okay. So nasal sounds are sounds where we have air flowing through the nose. So if you make an M and then plug your nose, guess what? The M stops. Okay. That's because the M depends on nasal airflow. Okay. It's also why it sounds kind of funny when you have a cold. The sinuses are all blocked up. You can't move very well. Okay. All right, so take a couple minutes and take a look at the consonants that you find in language number 7, and see if you can put them on this chart. Yeah.
Where was glottal stop?
Glottal stop would be, I didn't put it on the chart here in gray, it would be one of the throat sounds and it would be the stops. Okay? All right, so as you're doing that, I'm going to draw the same chart. I'm gonna put the sounds on here as well. Those. I know this is really bad form talking to you while I get my back turned, but I'm gonna deal with it. Okay, now there's a couple things I need to say about the way that I've transcribed the words of number 7. Okay, one, if you see a D and a J stuck together, that's meant to be a J sound. Okay, so where is that going to go on our chart? It's in Africa. Tongue blade, there we go. Right there. Now, I've also made a distinction between 2 different kinds of T and 2 different kinds of D. One of them is underlined and the other one is not. This is a peculiarity of languages like Tamil. So the T in Tamil that's underlined is pronounced kind of like a ta, ta. So if you know Spanish, it's that kind of a T. Ta. Okay? The T without the underline is produced with the tongue tipped a little scooted a little bit back. Ta, 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 ta. Okay, so when you hear somebody trying to kind of fake an Indian accent, you hear that sound a lot because those sounds come up in languages in India. All right? So they're both tongue tip sounds, and so we can maybe just set them next to the regular ones. Okay, so if you've got 2 T's in a row, that means something different. So we've got 2 T's, we've got 2 K's, and I think we have one with 2 P's as well. Okay? That means you just hold it for longer. So if you look at the very last ones, yep, body. Yep, body. So the P is held for a little bit longer than you might be. So it's not yep, body, yep, body. Okay? And that's again another feature that kind of makes this language a little more distinctive. Yeah?
Alright, I'm curious about the pronunciation of the double A. I'm wondering if that is supposed to be Ba'aldra, Brada, or Aldrada.
That's a long vowel.
Long vowel.
Yeah, we'll get to vowels in just a minute. But yeah, so the double vowel is going to be a long vowel. And this is a common linguist's convention. If you want to show that a sound is pronounced long, you write 2 of them. Okay? So with the doubled consonants, long consonant. Double vowels, long vowel. It's a pretty easy kind of thing to get used to. All right, so here's the chart of consonants that I've kind of put together from this kind of starter language number 7. Okay? Now as you look at that, you say, okay, there's some interesting things here. So in English, we don't have this kind of a distinction. We don't have a ta and a ta. It's just all T. Okay? We don't have the long ones in English, although we do write consonants doubled, like in a word like button. Okay? But we don't pronounce them. So there's another kind of illusion. But on the whole, you look at this and say, well, where are all the consonants? There don't seem to be very, very different. Okay. And the answer is, this is it. This is what you get. There's actually one more consonant that's not in your list. That's a ch. I'll just use that. And we get a ch in the language as well. I just happen not to have had it. Okay? But if you're taking these as kind of the starting point for a language, these are the kinds of questions you want to start asking yourself. Okay? So I got a j, but I didn't have a ch. Do I want one? And if I put one in, what's it going to sound like? What's part of this? How is it going to become part of this system? Okay? And that's one of the reasons you want to make a chart like this, because that will give you an idea of where the holes are. Especially if this is a language that you're making up on your own, and you've got a couple dozen names. You can put the consonants on a chart like this and say, okay, I seem to have lots and lots of names with a V in them. Is that a problem? And if it is, how do I fix that problem? Can I change some of the V's to something else? Or I can just kind of be aware of that, and when I create new names, maybe include some other sounds instead. Okay? But you don't know this until you've actually just kind of laid the consonants out. And then you know. It's like, okay, there's some things that I now kind of pay attention to and be aware of. And like this sound here, we happen not to have one in the list. Maybe I want one, so I can add it. But I won't know that I'm missing it unless I put it on a chart or done some kind of comparative. Okay, another obvious gap here is we've got a K, but we don't have a G. Okay, all of the other ones, I've got a T and a D, a P and a B, but I don't have a K and then a G. So maybe I want to add it. Okay? So that's the utility of a chart. All right. Shall we move on to vowels? Yeah, and that's one strategy you can take. Well, I know what the consonants are of English. Maybe I want my language to be unlike English in this very fundamental way, that there are just very few consonants. Okay, so for example, the Hawaiian language has 11 consonants. So not very many. So what does that do? In fact, that's starter language number 1. You can take a look at that. And so what does that do to the language if you don't have very many consonants? How do you make up for that? Well, one way it looks like Hawaiian makes up for it is the words are long. And that's a different kind of strategy. Okay? All right, now vowels. In the interest of time, I'm going to let you kind of fret about the vowels on your own. But you'll notice that I have included a chart where you can put the vowels yourself. Okay? Now in Tamil we have kind of a basic 5-vowel system. Okay. Is this enough? Maybe you want some other vowels. So if you happen to know a language like German or French and you know they have other vowels like U, maybe you want to include that. So you can include that kind of a vowel. Okay, or if you know Russian, they have the vowel. You can include that kind of a vowel. So you can add some vowels, or maybe the 5-vowel system, maybe that's just too ordinary. One of my very favorite languages to think about and study is Nahuatl. In Nahuatl, there's only 4 vowels. Those are them. Only 4 vowels. Those are the 4 vowels you get. And it makes Nahuatl words look a little different. In fact, Nahuatl is on your starter map. It is language number 3. Okay, so you can take a look at Nahuatl. See what? Oh, that's really different. Okay, it's different than English. Okay. But again, you're not going to really be aware of these until you plot them out and say, okay, there are my vowels. How can I make them different? Am I happy with what I have here? How can I change it? How can I add to it or take things away to make it more in line with what I'm hearing in my mind for this language? Okay. All right. Now, consonants and vowels are great, but syllables are really where the action is if you want to get to the heart of what makes a language sound like it does. And especially if you want to start creating new words for the language. Okay? So again, we'll start with number 7 here, and we'll take a look to see what we can do about syllable structure, what we can learn about syllable structure, so that we can then extend those syllable structure patterns to kind of make up new words that will have the same look and feel of as the syllables we already know. Okay, so real quickly, take a look at those 20 words in language 7, and just maybe put a little dot where you think that the syllable boundaries ought to go. Okay, so like number 1. Okay, where should the syllable boundary be?
After the M.
Say again?
After the M.
After the M. Okay, I agree. But now we have some things to think about. Okay, so we know that in this language, syllables can end with an M. They can also begin with 2 consonants. And these are some things we'll want to keep in mind. Okay? So go through and find all the places where we have consonants stuck together. Where would you put a syllable in? Okay, so we have, there's one cluster of consonants, and that's where we put the syllable in. Next word down, anji. Okay, I'd put it there, maybe even there. Okay, so either between the N and the D or between the D's. A couple of options. Okay, number 3. Most linguists will split the K between the syllables. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think it's a pretty standard move. Okay, number 4. Another cluster of consonants. Where are we going? A couple of just geminate consonants. So there's another MB. And number 8. Number 9. Number 10. There's an interesting one. We've got an R and then a V. Okay, number 11. We've got another ND. Oh, I missed one. Number 12. Oh. Yeah, number 12, instead of the TTH, that should just be an underlined note. There's numbers. Okay, number 17, an LDR. Probably want to split it between the L and the D. Okay, number 18, we have a DR. We keep that in the same syllable, we split it. What do you think? So between the 3rd and the 4th syllable, where should the boundary be? Before the D or after the D? Probably before. So we have some vowel and then DR. Okay, number 19, we have another NB, that one. And, okay. So now we have a list here of all of the clusters of consonants and where we would put the syllable boundary. So, a couple things to notice. First, if you have a nasal consonant like M or N, we'll want to put the syllable boundary after that nasal consonant, usually. Okay. So we have this one here, this one, there's a question about that. This one definitely, this one, this one. So this is a common move. You have a nasal followed by a stop, with syllable boundary there. But it also tells you that your syllables can end with a nasal consonant. Okay? Now if you're really on the ball, you will have noticed too that M and B are both lip sounds. They agree in where they're produced. That N and D are both tongue tip sounds. Okay? And that you never get in this data that we have, these 20 words, you never get a nasal followed by a consonant where the nasal and the consonant disagree in where they're produced. That's something to remember. All right, when we get 2 consonants at the beginning of the syllable, what kinds of consonants are they? Well, we get a B and an L here, we get a B and an R there. Okay, so remember, I'm thinking of this as a single sound, so that kind of counts as just one consonant. And we get another DR here. Okay, so it looks like you can have a stop followed by a liquid at the beginning of a syllable. So you can put all of that together and say, okay, my syllable can have a stop followed by a liquid, and that's going to have a vowel. All syllables have to have a vowel. And then there might be a nasal consonant at the end. And now we have a little formula for making up new syllables. And you can apply this formula by kind of plugging in the sounds you already know about, the ones we have on that chart over there, plugging them into this formula, and just start generating syllables. And then you just string the syllables together, and you can make names of any length or any complexity that you need. And they will have a consistent look and feel because the syllable formula is something you created by looking at the words you already have. Okay? Now, I could have done the same kind of demonstration with any of the 8 languages that I've included on the start. And for fun, you ought to try it at home. Look at one of the other languages and say, okay, how do syllables work? What kinds of consonants can I have at the beginning of syllables? Can I have consonants at the ends? What kinds of consonants? And so on. Okay? Be a good exercise. Yeah? Sure. Okay, so here's the formula. Now, notice that the way that I've written the formula, I haven't indicated that some of these things have to be there and other things don't. So I can indicate that the things that have to be there, or the things that don't have to be there, I can just put in parentheses. Okay? So now I can just create syllables that have as complex a structure as that, or a very simple structure. Okay? So how about so look at that word, and then look at the words in the list in number 7. Does that look like it might fit? Yeah, it looks pretty good. And I just used this formula over and over again for the number of syllables that I have. Okay. And once you have a formula like that, I mean, you can just go to town. If you're computationally minded, you can write a little Perl script or a little Python script and just spit them out. Okay. I did this a long time ago once for a language that I was playing with, and I had a little a script, and I just had to generate all of the possible roots that had 2 syllables with the syllable structure constraints that I specified, and it came to like 9,800 roots. Cool. I don't have to think about it anymore. Just pick one. Okay? Not necessarily the way I wanted to go, but it gave me an idea of what the kind of the full logical space was that I had to play with. So again, if you do scripting, it's a pretty trivial task. And if you don't do scripting, that's fine. Personally, I prefer languages that are kind of handcrafted, artisanal languages. All right, now this is the point where I should set you loose on exercise or activity number 2. Now that we've created a syllable formula, make 20 more words. I'm going to give you like 3 minutes. Make as many as you can. If you don't get all 20, that's fine. Okay? And then assign some words some meanings. I've given you places where you can create meanings. Okay? The idea ultimately is to, once you've finished working through the worksheet, you should be able to actually translate a little story that has to back. Okay? All right, so go ahead and, like I say, for the next 3 minutes, make as many words as you can using the syllable formula. What's that? Yeah, including or not including as you see. Towards the end of the thing. Okay, by the way, you don't have to do number 7. Okay, if you already started and did something else, or if you have your own language and you feel now inspired, I know what the syllable structure is, I can make up new words, go for it. This is supposed to be helpful for you. About 30 40 weeks, and that's going to be 3 minutes. No problem. Yeah.
Well, in the song back to the language,
Okay, so in Xhosa, they have different, they use some of the letters like C and X and Q to indicate some of those sounds. That's one strategy they use. So if you develop your list of sounds, and you know, well, I'm not using C, I'm not using Q, I can use that for something else. And then just say, yeah, I'm using Q, let's do that sound. Okay? If you're already using all of them, then if you consider maybe a particular combination, or you can add some kind of duplicate to a letter. Yeah, if you're serious about getting the story published, then I would not recommend doing that, because publishers get really touchy if you start adding all kinds of the extra duty axle letters.
Native American languages, do they have sort of a core way that they structure their sentences and their words that ties into all of them, or are they all very different?
Well, there are over 200 language families in the Americas, so you can be more specific. Which languages are you talking about?
I'm looking at the Stern Algonquin.
Okay, yeah, there is a lot of stuff that's been written about Algonquin. So, not as much about the phonology of the kids there, more about word structure. And so I would recommend looking at anything that Goddard has written. IKPS. He's pretty heavy going, but he's like the authority on Algonquin. Okay. So I'm reluctant to interrupt this burst of creative activity, but we've got to keep moving. Okay?
Okay.
So this gives you an idea of how you can now generate new words for your language. Okay? And again, if all you're interested in is getting some really cool names, that might be enough. Okay? But now you can do it in a principled and systematic way, making sure that the names that you're creating have a consistent look and feel. Okay? All right, any last questions before we move on to more grammar kinds of things? Yeah?
What characters did you say that publishers shy away from? Accents or?
Yeah, anything that is not ASCII, they kind of get early. Just because it becomes a problem for the typesetters.
Umlauts and things like that, that's
Yeah,
too much
that
work.
kind of stuff. I'm seeing it more and more now. But yeah, it's still something you want to avoid. If you can find a way to get away, if you can find a way to avoid that, then I would do that. Yeah.
What about putting things like something down, let's say to an apostrophe and a space in apostrophe or a particular or something? Would that be something, because it shouldn't be easy enough to get something like that out as long as you're creative enough, but use what's already on.
What I'm going to say is, just from my own experience in having to create spelling systems for native languages, you want to make it so that people can learn it and use it with a minimum of fuss. And I think typesetters are just like the rest of us in their way. Okay? They don't want to have to think about it too hard. Okay? So if you're making a typesetter or an editor think too hard, then you may want to try something else. And editors will let you know if they have to think too hard on something. Okay. All right. So let's move on. So that was a little bit about sounds. Now, ideally, we would spend, the whole 2 hours just talking about phonology. It's what I do professionally. It's just, it's what gets me up in the mornings, thinking about sound structure of language. I love it. It's really fun stuff. Okay. But language is about more than sense. So what we want to talk about next is how you would organize clauses and sentences. Okay? There's, again, a wide range of variety, or there's a wide variety of ways that languages do this. But it basically comes down to answering a very simple question. How do you know who did what to whom? Okay? And there are two basic strategies for providing that sort of information. Here's some of this. Okay, so I'm going to write down a sentence in Latin, not to show off my my learning and erudition, but because it's a really good example for one of the kinds of strategies that languages use to indicate how information flows in a sentence. Actually, before I get to the Latin example, I'm going to use one from my childhood. Yes, with the candlestick.
Mine always like that too.
Okay,
I still think the movie was better than the game.
I never saw the movie.
It's hilarious.
Okay. You know, and it wasn't until a few years ago that I realized that the victim actually had a name. Mr. Body. Okay. Now, if you look at this sentence, we can think of this as kind of a little play. Okay, we have actors in the play, we have props, we have scenery. Okay, so there's a little drama unfolding here. Okay, and one style of sentence analysis that linguists use kind of takes advantage of that metaphor. And we talk about the roles that the nouns play in a sentence. So Colonel Mustard in this sentence is what we call an agent. Okay. Mr. Body is what we call a patient. Okay, so these are terms of art, not necessarily connected to what you might think you know about the word patient. Okay, that's just what it's called. Okay, a library. We might call this a location. I'm going to simplify a bit and say anything that's not an agent or a patient, that's just a prop. Okay. In this particular theory, there are about 12 to 15 different roles that we can assign nouns in sentences. Okay. And what we really, really want to know in any given sentence is how the information in the sentence flows. Okay, so in this sentence, how do we know that it was Colonel Mustard that did the deed? Right, because it's first in the sentence. I could switch around Mr. Body and Colonel Mustard and come up with a perfectly good English sentence that means something different. Was it Mr. Body killed Colonel Mustard? That's a different kind of thing that we can talk about later. Okay? So in English, this kind of information flows because of the order that these things are in. Okay? So we know that Colonel Mustard is the one doing the deed, and Mr. Body is the one who is suffering because of the order of those two things relative to the verb. Okay? All this extra stuff, this is just kind of setting the stage. You know, this is scenery, this is not actually necessary stuff. If we just said Colonel Mustard killed Mr. Body, perfectly fine English sentence. We learned what we need to know. Okay. So one basic strategy of having this kind of information flow in a sentence is looking at the order that these things come in. Right? Now this is something you may not have thought about before. Right? Not all languages will sort it out like this. That the doer, then the verb, and then the patient comes in that order. Okay? For us, this seems perfectly self-evident and natural. In Shoshone, the verb and the patient are flipped around. And it would be the equivalent of Colonel Mustard, Mr. Body killed. That's just the way the information flows in a Shoshone sentence. Okay? In a language like Hawaiian, the verb would be the thing that comes first. Kill Colonel Mustard, Mr. Body. And Hawaiian speakers know that's the way things work. And that's how we know who. So word order is the first strategy that we can use to control the flow of information in a sentence. All right? So let me write that. See, now we're getting to the stuff that most people don't think about. So word order. Okay, I'll have more to say about word order in just a minute. Now, the other way that we can control the flow of information or decide who's doing what to whom is you actually put little markers on the nouns. And those little markers say, I'm the subject, or I'm the object, or whatever. Okay? So this is where I get to pull out my Latin. Okay, y'all read that sentence? Brutus Caesarem occidit. Brutus, Caesar, killed. Is it?
No, I have no clue.
You have no clue because you don't know Latin. But if you knew Latin, you would know that this thing, the US on Brutus, says, I'm the subject. And the EM on Caesar says, I'm the object. Now you know. Yeah?
So his name is Bruce, so it was called Brutus because he's the subject.
Well, the stem for his name ends with a T. Okay? And if we wanted to say that Caesar killed Brutus, I don't know what's the nominative for Caesar? We know what it is. Might be Caesar. Okay. Caesar, Brutem, Auxiliate. That's how you know. Right? But notice what you can do with this thing. Now because the nouns themselves are flagged for their kind of function, you can start mixing it up. You can have that word be first. But it's okay because you know it's the direct object because it has this marker. You can have the verb be first, and it wouldn't matter what order these two come in because they've been marked. Okay? So this is the other basic grounding plan for controlling information in a sentence. Okay?
Is that like in Japanese where they don't have like the question mark, they just add the colon to the end to make the question?
That's a similar kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so in English we indicate questions by manipulating word order as well as a certain set of question words. Okay, in other languages, you just add something to the verb that says this sentence is now a question.
Japanese does have the participles to indicate subjects and object.
Yeah, they're usually not thought of as actually being attached to the nouns, but they're separate particles from them, but they have exactly that function.
Yeah.
You're right. Okay, so how do I call this? Well, the technical term for this is case. And you're all intelligent people, so I'm just going to use the word case. Okay? Case is just the word that means this is a marker that indicates a grammatical function. And when I talk about grammatical function, I just mean who's doing what to whom. It's like subject and object. All right?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
And so in Latin, if you still use Brutus for like group, but you look Brutum, Caesar, Auxiliate, is that still correct?
Yep. Okay, that kind of flexibility is certainly possible. Now, there might be a normal word order if you're a Latin speaker. You might say, well, yeah, okay, that's possible, but now you're saying something subtly different. It's like it was Brutus that Caesar killed. And it might have that sort of flavor to it. Okay, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know Latin. But, sorry, say it.
Different Latin authors wrote in a different word order of the counting strings. One would write always prefer the last, the rest would write and so that'd be a good way to have a language in your novel and you wanted different dialects or different regions of it, they could become different word orders. Case on it, that's really word order, don't say but they could, play mixing language.
Yeah, so there's different pragmatic effects, like, yeah, maybe you're trying to say something that's subtly different. So I know that, for example, in Shoshone, if you say, the man saw the woman, you say he saw her, or he saw the woman, the man, and put the man at the very end. Okay, that's saying something that's just different than just man saw the woman. It's almost like, yeah, it's the guy, it's the man. And so languages where this kind of thing is tagged are more prone to that sort of kind of freedom of word order, right? Okay, so this is a possibility that you might want to explore in your language. I'm going to mark the nouns for their grammatical function, and that way it's going to free me up to use word order for other things. Okay. Or you may choose to have word order be kind of the way that you control the flow of information. Okay? And many languages, even if they have case, will still have kind of a rigid word order. They expect to see things come in a particular way. All right, now, I want to talk a little bit more about word order. Let me look at my schedule so we can make sure I built it 6 sessions. Okay, so if we think about subjects, objects, and verbs, there are 6 possible orders for those 3 elements of the sentence. Okay, these are them. What's interesting, though, is that these word orders aren't kind of randomly distributed among the world's languages. The vast majority of the world's languages use one of these 2. Okay? With the edge being given to SOV. So this would be a language like Japanese, Turkish, Ute, and Shoshone. These are SOV languages where the verb comes at the very end. Okay? Languages that are what's that?
Sorry, I was just wondering what French and
Latin was probably something like SOV, although it's hard to tell because all we really have of Latin now is, the very finely polished prose and poetry of authors who took care about how they organized their sentences. So it's hard to say. SVO could be languages like French, English. Many languages of West Africa are like this, Yoruba, and so on. Okay. Let's skip these 2 for a minute. Okay, so this accounts for about 95% of the world's languages. These 2, VSO and VOS, account for about the other 5%. These are languages of the Pacific Islands. Welsh is VSO. Okay. Classical Hebrew was VSO, as was Classical Arabic. Modern languages have a little more flexibility. Kekchi, Mayan language, is VOS. Palawan, language of the South Pacific, is also VOS. Okay. They're out there. There are not many of them compared to these 2, but they're out there. Yeah?
When you give those percents, you're talking about out of the number of languages in the world, not the number of speakers of them.
Right. Right. Okay? And that's an important point to make. Because if you think of Spanish, with its gazillion speakers, and it's an SVO language. Okay? How do we weight that? How do we weigh that in comparison with a language like Palawan, which is VOS? Do we want to look at raw numbers of speakers, or do we want to look at just languages by themselves? And it's a problem that linguists who worry about this sort of typology have to think about. I'm not a typologist, so I don't have to think about it. I just have to point out the interesting fact that the vast majority of the world's languages do this, okay? As well as the vast majority of people on the planet. Now, these 2, we don't find these in nature. And it's no accident that Klingon is this one. He did that on purpose. Yes, he said, this is not a human language. So why should I abide by human language typology? The sound system of Klingon is bizarre. Again, he did that on purpose. And the way verbs are organized is mind-bogglingly weird. He did it on purpose. It was meant to be an alien language, okay? But it doesn't show up any better than it does just in the basic choice of word order. Okay? So what seems to be the generalization here is that we have 2 big plans. Either the object can come before the subject, object can come before the verb, or the verb comes before the object. Those are the 2 big distinctions that we want to make, that we were trying to think about. Okay? And all of these word orders, one of the 2 things is going to happen. And that seems to be the relevant and the important decision to make. Right? Because if we look at the order of the verb and its object, we can guess with pretty good accuracy what phrases are going to look like as far as the orders of the elements. Let me show you what I mean. So if the verb is first, when you have a noun phrase with an adjective, and the noun comes before the adjective. And again, think of Spanish or French. So a white house in Spanish, is what? Una casa blanca, right? A house white. So nouns come before adjectives. Prepositions will come before the nouns. So in the box. If you have a possessive construction, like the leg of a table, okay, the noun comes first, and the thing possessing it comes after, usually as an of or some kind of prepositional phrase. Now for OV languages, where the object comes before the verb, these things are flipped around. So we have adjectives come before nouns. So we're familiar with that in English. We have like house. This one's kind of odd. The preposition comes after the noun. Okay? I don't know of any constructions in English that look like this. So you just kind of have to imagine for yourself, instead of in the box, it's the box in, which seems to be bizarre. Okay? That's the way it works. Question?
So I thought English was SVO.
It is.
So why do we not have that NA thing like
English is special. Okay. We'll get to that in just a minute.
English is a conglomerate of so many different languages, half the time we don't know what we're doing.
Well, we find similar problems with other Germanic languages that don't have the checkered history. Okay? And then we have genitive followed by name. So instead of the leg of the table, we can say the table's leg. Now notice, English allows both of those options. In some cases, they might mean something a little bit different. So we can talk about John's book, or we can talk about the book of John. And the book of John might mean something different than John's book. Okay? So we can use that to our advantage. We have both orders possible, okay? But they might have a difference in meaning. This one, you just have to kind of roll with it. If you learn a language like Japanese, postpositions, that's just how it goes. Turkish does the same thing. Shishiki does the same thing. It's just that the locator word comes after the noun. Okay? All right, so since you brought it up, English does this. At one point in the history of the Germanic languages, they were probably more like this than they were like this. And you still see shades of this in German, where the word order in subordinate clauses is really funky, okay, compared to word order in main clauses. In fact, the word order of subordinate clauses in German is this. It looks like this. In main clauses, it looks like this. So, Germanic languages as a whole have kind of this mixed history, so we can get both of them. So the point of showing you this is that once you've decided, okay, I kind of like, SOV word order, that's kind of cool. Okay? There are some other things that you don't have to think about so much if you don't want to. But okay, if I've got the object before the verb, then maybe I'll just do these. And you don't have to think so hard about it. Just let it go. Okay? Or maybe you want to buck the trend. Be like English. Do this, but have one of those. Okay? But now that you know what these options are, you can make those choices consciously instead of just letting English take you where it's going to take you, which might be into some unfortunate cases. Yeah?
Do you know what languages
Sindarin is, I think they're both VO. Sindarin, I think, is ESO. Quenya, I think, is SVO.
What about the
Don't have enough of those. Although my guess would be that okay, so if we understand some things about basic word order, okay, we can start playing with things. And like I said, we can make these decisions consciously instead of just, okay, well, I'm just going to do what English does because that's all I know. Now you know a little bit different. You can try something different. Okay? One other thing, and I hadn't actually planned to talk about, there's a lot of people who are spending a couple minutes. So if you're talking about names, okay, often names are meaningful, and they're meaningful in ways that we find compounds to be meaningful. Okay? So if you look at a list of old Germanic names, you very often will find, names like White Helm, where you have an adjective followed by a noun. Okay? This is a common type of name in Germanic languages. Okay, the word Leonard comes from lion words. So there's another kind of a compound there, a noun followed by a noun. And when you get these compounds, what seems to matter most is this part of the compound, the second part. Okay? So bright helm is a type of helm. And so we say that the head of the compound is on the right. Okay? Now, you may choose to do something a little bit different, kind of buck the trend. Maybe you want your compounds to be left-handed. And that would be kind of cool. All right. And when you construct names, you can kind of take into account a sort of order manipulation to make sure that you're doing things in a consistent direction. All right. That's a little bit about syntax. Really a syntactician. There's some interesting things in syntax, but not much. I don't know field. But these basic things are things that everyone knows. All right. Okay, this is the place where I let you loose on activities 3 and 4, where you get to translate some phrases and words. Sentences. So take a look at that. So you can see what kinds of things you would do. So if you look at the third activity, it says decide what word order you would like to use for your language. So we've talked about the 6 different possibilities and implications for those different word orders. And so you can look at the sentences, the sheep flees, the horse pulls the wagon, the woman sees the field, and you can translate those, as it might work best for you. Okay? Then in the fourth activity, you can take a look at the more specific phrases. So the quick horse, the sheep, the big wagon, or in the wagon, into the field. Okay? And you can start playing around with some of these sorts of implications of word order. So if I have a language where the object comes before the verb, what does that mean for something like into the field? Well, it means I'm probably going to at least want to think about doing something like this. So the field into, which sounds really strange for us, but it's a perfectly normal way to say it in a language like that. And again, it gives you a little extra, or a little color. These are
order affect how it sounds in the fact that the Germanic languages are partially romantic.
In that sense, no. So individual sounds, no. But rhythm can certainly be implicated with word order differences. So a grad school buddy of mine did her dissertation on a language of southern Arizona. And what she showed was that, part of what she did, was she showed that because of word order constraints in the language, the presence or the absence of a definite article kind of made the difference between the rhythm of one sentence and the rhythm of another. So the definite article can't be the first thing in a sentence. So if you have a noun that would otherwise have an article there, it's gone. Which means that the rhythm of sentences is directly affected by that, or by that syntactic constraint. So there's that kind of sound syntax interaction. Not exactly the kind you were talking about. So.
Well, I was just wondering because I know the French just flows. I know the Spanish just flows. I know Italian just flows, whereas Germanic is hard, it stops. It's very straightforward and it kind of breaks up the rhythm.
Can I tell you a secret? I think French sounds good. But that's just, I think German sounds beautiful. That was my undergraduate degree.
Well, I mean, you get what I'm saying though, right?
Yeah, but then we need to be careful about injecting personal aesthetic preferences into judgments about languages and their speakers. So if we have an aesthetic preference for the kinds of syllable structure and rhythmic patterns of French, Italian, Spanish, then that's going to guide us to create words in a particular way. If our preferences, however, are for a different kind of sound, well then we're going to come up with different solutions for those sorts of problems. But either way, it's not really going to have much of an effect on basic syntactic structure. Which is what I understood your question to be.
No, that's I think for German it depends on your native languages and what kind of sound you use. I think it has an effect on German.
I think there's all kinds of ideas. All right, let's move on. So other questions about syntax? So we've looked at sounds, and we've talked about how we might kind of rationalize a phonological system based on names that you've already created or words you've already created, or maybe just a random list of words from a language you kind of like. Okay? So if that language is Tamil, well, I've given you 20 words, and you can play around with them and make pseudo-Tamil to your heart's content. Okay? Now we kind of know how to do that. Okay? We've just talked about some word order implications for different kinds of phrases. So if we have a basic ground plan for how information flows in a clause, okay, that will have implications on how information flows within smaller parts of the clause, so in a phrase. So that will determine whether the adjective comes before the noun it modifies or after the noun it modifies. What I want to talk about now is some more kind of word formation strategies that we can use to create complex words out of simpler parts. Okay? Now, there are three analogies.
All of this in college, or I mean, obviously this made a lot of people out of it, but I mean, they got a lot of space.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to talk about towards the end, but I can sort of talk about that right now. So what's the advice you get if you want to write? You should read, okay, so that you know what kinds of things you like. And so you can see how authors do things with their characters and with their stories. You need to read a lot if you want to learn how to write. Okay? It's no less true about creating languages. If you want to create a language that is going to be internally consistent and rich and form part of the backdrop of the fictional world, you need to understand how languages work. And one way to do that is to look at a lot of different languages. Okay? Not necessarily to learn how to speak them, although that's certainly a worthwhile goal. But if you go to a library, especially a university library, there are shelves and shelves full of reference grammars of languages you probably never heard of. And it's worth the time and trouble to just wander into the stacks, pull a reference grammar off the shelf, say, gee, I've always wondered how Arabic works, and then take a look. And you find out some really interesting things. You don't have to necessarily take classes in linguistics. Oh, I would recommend that. I really enjoy my classes, and I enjoy teaching. But if you don't have that kind of time, you don't have those resources, you could certainly go into any library, take a look at some reference grammars. The Teach Yourself series of books, wonderful set of books, okay, that can give you all kinds of great ideas for things about language. My very favorite one is the Teach Yourself Finnish, the old one, not the new one by, I think, is Arthur Whitney, is his name. It's about the best reference grammar of Finnish out there. As part of this Teach Yourself series. Finnish is weird. It is really, really weird. And there are 7 million people who speak it every day. And those kinds of things just boggle my mind. And so you can look at any language in that way. Okay, so languages I work on professionally, I love thinking about how they work. Shoshone and Ute, I mean, they're fascinating languages. And I mean, they don't have as many speakers as Finnish does, but there are people who still use it every day for all kinds of purposes. And so it's worth finding grammar in Shoshone, pulling it off the shelf, saying, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." So familiarizing yourself with many different kinds of languages is only going to make the languages you create richer and more sophisticated. So I just want to put that plug out there. Go to your library. Go look up some languages. See what you can find. Yeah. Do I speak? German and Dutch, besides English.
And then how many do you know, like,
Any of the Germanic languages I can read. So that will include then Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, Frisian, the language of my ancestors. And I'm kind of, well, as far as they go, that's a different kind of question. So I wanted to come back to towards the end, finding systems of what to do. All right. Well, then let's move on to talking about word structure. Okay, designing complex words out of simple words. So a lot of the action that in grammar, and what people traditionally understand of grammar, is taking a stem or a root and adding all kinds of stuff to it. Okay, so conjugating verbs. So you think back to your French class, or your Spanish class, or Russian, or whatever language you learned, okay, chances are you've had to learn a fair amount of word structure. You had to know what the endings were. Okay, those endings tell you important things about grammatical structure in the language. Okay, what they also do is they take simple parts, put them together to make complex words. Okay? Now the study of word structure is called morphology. And morphology is seen as comprising at least two distinct areas. What we call inflection and what we call derivation. Okay? So I want to say a little bit about both of these areas. Some people have like compounding as a third. And I understand what the fuss is about compounding. I've just never found it that interesting. And the languages I work on don't really use it. Okay? So inflection and derivation, that's where I'm going to focus my remarks. So when we talk about grammar, that's really kind of a code for inflection or inflectional morphology. Okay? So again, think of your typical verb in Spanish. Okay? First thing you got to decide was an ER verb, an AR verb, or an IR verb. And that's going to tell you a whole bunch about what other endings you're going to put on it. Okay? And you have to know, okay, what tense is it? Okay, what's the subject? And all of these grammatical bits are encoded in the endings that we put on the verbs. Okay? So I want to talk about three kinds of grammatical bits when we talk about inflection. We've already talked about one of them actually. Case is inflection, but it's inflection that we put on nouns. Okay? This tells us about the grammatical function of nouns. So we'll switch gears and talk about verbs for the moment. So the three kinds of things that typically are found on verbs are tense, aspect, and what we call mood. Okay? Yeah, this is all inflection. I'm not going to say as much about mood. Now there's another kind of thing that we find on lots of languages on verbs, and that's agreement. I'm also not going to say a lot about that. Agreement seems to be a European kind of thing. None of the languages I work on have agreement. Okay, Semitic languages have agreement, but that's pretty close to Europe. So agreement is kind of it's on verbs, but it's not really a verbal thing. So I'm not going to talk about those a lot either. So let's just talk about tense and aspect. Okay, so what is tense? Well, tense talks about the event the time that some event took place relative to some other point in time. Okay? And that sounds like a really confusing definition, so let's break it apart. Okay, so tense talks about the time that some activity or event took place relative to some other point in time. Okay, so let's first imagine that that point in time is the moment of speaking. Okay? So if I said, this morning I ate scrambled eggs, that verb is in the past tense. And I put it in the past tense because now, at the moment of speaking, that thing has already happened. It's done. It's quite tasty. Okay, so that's a past tense. So the event has already taken place as of some other point in time. That point in time then being the time of speaking. There are other ways to sort out tense. Okay, we can talk about other points in time, and things get really confusing really quickly. I know it reminds me of a lot of problem physics and like that. Okay, so I don't want to get into that too much. So the three distinctions in tense that we typically make are past, present, and future. Okay. So past tense means something that happened before the moment of speaking, or some other reference point. Present tense, you'd think it would mean that it is happening. That's not really how we use present tense in English. But in many languages, that is exactly how it's used to be. Okay, something is happening at the moment. Okay, and future tense, something we expect to happen after the moment of speaking. Now, in English, we really only have past and non-past. We don't really have a future tense that is inflectional. So if you think about verbs, think of the verb eat. Okay? Now I'm thinking about eat. Okay, so we have kind of the infinitive to eat. So what's the past tense of eat? Okay. The non-past tense is eat. We don't have a separate form of the verb eat that means future. If we want to talk about the future, we have to add a helping verb. Right. Or gonna eat. Or whatever. Okay? So in English, we really only have two tenses that are marked on the verb. Past tense and non-past tense. When I first realized this when I was an undergraduate, it blew my mind. Like, wait, of course I can talk about the future. But that wasn't really the issue. The issue was, how do we create new words? And in English, we do not create a new word that means future from a verb like eat. Now this is a point that's worth making. Just because we don't have a way to mark the verb for the future does not mean we can't talk about the future. Okay, so there are some clowns, some economists a while ago who was starting to make all kinds of inferences about Asian languages and English and future tense and who's doing better financially because they can plan for the future. Nonsense. Okay? Everybody can talk about the future. What's different is whether we have to mark the verb to do it. Okay? And in English, we don't. In Shoshone, you do. So the verb to eat in Shoshone is tikka. Okay? So if I want to say I'm going to eat or I'm planning to eat, that means I'm planning to eat later. Okay, notice I'm kind of hedging and not saying I will eat, because that's not really what it means. And in fact, most languages that have a future tense, it doesn't really mean future tense. It means that's the plan. But an asteroid might come and wipe us all out, and so much for plans. So the future always has this weird feeling of, it may not happen. Okay? And in the Romance languages, the future tense actually came from kind of the conditional form of the verb. I mean, it might happen. We expect it to happen, but we're not sure if it's going to happen. So that conditional form of the verb is now where we talk about mood. So tense is a thing, but it starts to bleed over into mood. And it's not clear-cut where one ends and the other begins. Okay? In Homer, they have a similar sort of problem. They have an ending on the verb, and that ending is ni. And it means basically future tense or something that might have happened, but we don't know, or something that definitely didn't happen, but could have. So future tense is all mixed up with this kind of conditional, contrary to fact stuff. Why? Because we don't know, and we just don't know about the future. So tense becomes a real interesting kind of thing when you think about it that way. And if the people in your fictional world have a different view of how the future is going to be, that's something to keep in mind. You might want to have their language reflect that. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask that, and I'm not a big, I don't know Elzinga, but I do know that it is a language. With that, and that, does anybody else here know it? Dr. Who? Okay. Well, you know, Gallifreyan. Because if you actually work in time, and there are points that you cannot alter, wouldn't they have some sort of thing in there, verbiage that would make it so that in the future, you know, there might be one future tense that could happen, one future tense that will happen.
Yeah, and that would be, if you're going to design Gallifreyan as a language, that would be something you want to keep in mind. That would be really handy to have a way to distinguish events that are kind of fixed, either because they've already happened or because you know for sure that they will happen, as opposed to events that are not fixed. And maybe that's the distinction. It has nothing to do with whether it's happened already or going to happen later. It's about the certainty with whether those things will happen or not. Things that are certain to happen, one tense. Things where you don't know, a different tense. That might be a way to think about it. Okay? And before now, you probably never thought about it. And that's... Yeah.
So it would be like creating a separate whole marker for like a future uncertainty.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe you don't even worry about this idea of future. You just have certain and uncertain. Maybe that's the tense distinction of Gallifreyan. Things that are certain, these are things we know will happen or have happened or are happening. Things that are uncertain, you don't know. That would be a weird way to put it. Man, that's just...
You're welcome.
I feel like I want to write some notes down. Not that I'm interested in Gallifreyan necessarily, but that might be a way to think about it. Some problems I can have. Okay, so that's tense. Okay? So the time that an event takes place relative to some other point in time. It can either be before that point in time, after that point in time, or at that point in time, at the same point in time. Okay, next, aspect. This one's always kind of hard to describe. The best way to think about aspect is the event you're describing just a complete undifferentiated thing? Okay, so if I say, I ate scrambled eggs this morning, there's nothing in there about how long it took me, when I started, when I finished, if I finished. It's just a matter of, yeah, that was an event that happened. So we would refer to that in linguistics as a perfective. Okay. Again, the idea is that we're thinking about the event in its totality. That's just the event. And we're talking about it, and that's it. A different way to kind of structure events would be to think about, okay, I am eating eggs. So that means that right at this moment in time, that activity is going on. We don't know when it started, we don't know when it's going to end. We just know that right now, right in the middle of it, it's going on. Okay? That's a kind of imperfective.
Why is it imperfect?
Because we're not looking at the event as a totality, we're just looking at one slice in time of that event. Okay? Now notice how we use the so one form of the imperfective in English is what we call the progressive. That's where we use some form of the verb be plus an ing verb. Okay, so I am eating. Now notice when we put that in the past tense, well, I was eating eggs when the fire alarm went off. At that moment in time in the past, some other event was underway. That's an imperfective. We don't care when I started or when I finished. Okay? We just care that at that moment in time, that activity was going on. So that's what we call an imperfective. Okay? Now a third kind of aspect, most linguists bunch it up together with imperfective, but it's useful to think about it separately. It's called habitual. Okay? This is what we use the simple present tense form in English. Okay, so if I say, I walk to school, does that mean I'm doing it right now? I mean, can I say I walk to school and have that be true, even as I stand here talking to you? Yeah.
Because it's common.
Right, it's a common occurrence. It's something that happens regularly. Okay, this is called a habitual. And this is what the simple present tense is used for in English, or one of its uses. We use it to talk about things that occur on a more or less regular basis. Okay? More or less regular, because then you can talk about things like going to the gym. Maybe not quite so regular, but yeah, I go to the gym. I may not do it as often as I want to, or as regularly as I should, but I do it. Okay? So that's a habitual. So what all of these have in common is that they're not really concerned about when an activity took place, but they're rather concerned about how we view that activity. Is that activity viewed as kind of an undifferentiated, just that happened, that kind of, it's one of those things that's complete, or is it an incomplete kind of thing that might be interrupted by some other event, or is it kind of a regular occurrence, those types of things. Now again, we get this kind of bleed over from one area, so tense aspect, into another. So if we talk about a perfective, notice that in English, I can use the past tense form of the verb to make a perfective. I ate eggs this morning. That's perfective. I'm using the simple past tense to do it. So now, the perfective aspect has implications for past time. And this is a very common relationship that we see in languages. That the past tense and the perfective are very closely related. Typically because we don't know that an event is completed until it's already completed. And so that is a natural kind of relationship. And so you can create a system that's actually pretty complex. We can keep them separate if we like. Say, okay, well, I'm going to have these endings in these past, present, future. I'm going to have this other set of endings in these perfective and imperfective. But more likely is going to be, we'll have a past tense ending, we might have a present tense marker, and the future tense marker might be some kind of a mood marker as well, like conditional. They might share that marker. And the perfective might be similar to the past tense, or might be the same thing. So then they start to get really kind of tied up together. For that reason, when linguists talk about tense, mood, and aspect, they usually use the abbreviation TAM, tense, aspect, and mood. Because this typically forms one system in the verbal morphology of language. And sometimes it's really hard to kind of disentangle tense notions from aspect notions from mood notions. So it's useful to think about them separately just so you can get it clear in your head, but in reality, they kind of all work together and create kind of this picture of how we view events through time. Okay, so we can do this in a couple of different ways. So that's a little bit, it's starting to get kind of heavy. So we can do that in a couple of different ways. So we can think about, very carefully about the semantics of it all, but we can also think about, so how am I going to mark it? Okay, so here in English, so we have this verb eat, and how do we mark the past tense? We change the vowel. That's kind of fun. What about other verbs? A verb like walk, how do we mark the past tense? Yeah, we add a suffix. So now we have two different strategies for making complex words. Okay, so we can add a suffix. And I'm going to group in together prefixes as well. Okay, so this is just a little piece of something that has to attach to a word. And that little piece can tell you information about grammatical things, like tense, or aspect, or mood, or even case, or number. So how many of them do you have? Well, I have 5 books. I add that S to the end of book to mark number. So we have suffixes and prefixes in English. Typically help us to mark those kinds of distinctions. We can also change the form of the stem. Okay, so alongside eat and ate, so how do we make the plural form of a word like foot? Feet. We change the vowel again. So we can do that for plural. It doesn't have to be just verbs. that for noun plurals. Okay, woman, women. Another one. Person, people. There we just use a completely different stem. We just change the word altogether. Okay, that's called suppletion. You just replace one stem with another. And what's the past tense of go? Went. Okay? You replace one stem with another. Okay? It's another way of doing this. In English, that's pretty much what we get. The suffixes and prefixes, we get stem change, and for a handful of things, we get suppletion. Just change the stem out altogether. Okay? And Shoshone suppletion actually plays a large role in how we understand how words work. So, for example, if I kill one game animal, the verb I use is pekka. If I kill two or more, the verb I use is wasu. That's just the way it works. It depends on how many of them I got. If I only got one of them, then pekka. Got more than one of them, wasu. So suppletion, and there are about 3 dozen verbs that do this. And it's pretty regular. Well, regular, I mean, Shoshone speakers know about it, they understand the distinction, and it's not a problem. Yeah?
That's the verb, like that's how you kill.
Yeah. Yeah, so if I want to say, like, I killed the jackrabbit. Oh, now that I said it, I can't remember what jackrabbit is.
You use deer.
Oh, no, I'm right. Oh, yeah, I'll use deer. Okay. I deer killed. So if I kill a whole bunch of them,
What's that across the I?
that vowel is We get the vowel, and we have that vowel in English when we say like just a minute. What's that? Okay. So these are some strategies for creating complex words. You can have a prefix or a suffix. You can change the stem vowel, or you can even change a consonant. And Welsh does this, and Tolkien liked that so much that he used it in Sindarin. You change the initial consonant of a noun to make some kind of, to indicate some grammatical distinction. Okay? You replace the stem out with something else. Okay? There are a couple of other options that I think are kind of fun. Oh, good. I'll just show you 2 of them. One of them is infixation, and the other is what we call reduplication. Okay, so infixation really is just like a prefix or a suffix, except you just jam it into the middle of the word. Okay? So see, I had some examples. Okay, so there's a language in the Philippines called Bomtok. And so there's a word that means strong. Hikas. Sound familiar? No? Tagalog speakers. She could probably feed me some good examples from Tagalog. So this is the adjective that means strong. Hikas. If I want to say he is becoming strong, okay. Does it mean that? Okay. I insert that. Now notice I don't add it to the beginning or to the end. I just jam it in the middle there. Okay? It's actually a little more precisely placed than that, but yeah, so this is called an infix. It interrupts a step. And there's only one bona fide English infix that I'm not going to say in polite company. And you can kind of imagine what that is. It also begins with the letter But what all infixes have in common is that they interrupt the stem. So you're adding something to the stem, you're just adding it in a particular place. And these are kind of fun. So anybody ever looked at Navi from Avatar? They got infixation up the wazoo. All kinds of good stuff. Okay? Because the guy who developed the language, Paul Frommer, was a linguist. He understood some of these things about how language works. And was able to kind of play around with some of these ideas. Okay? So that's infixation. The last one, I think, is probably the first. Okay, reduplication. When we talk about reduplication, what we really mean is just the repetition of part or all of the stem to indicate some grammatical function or make some derivation. Okay? So in another language of the Philippines, Filipino language is really good for this. Okay, we can use reduplication to indicate the plural. So if we have a word like field, okay, there it is, dalo, field. Okay, you repeat part of the word, now it's fields. More than one of them. Okay. Reduplication is very often used for things like plurals. Or they're used to indicate verbal actions like something happening over and over again. So like if you had a word like, let's say, pata, and it means jump, maybe you can make a new verb, papata, that means to hop. Just jump over and over again. This is another very common thing that verbs, or that reduplication does in verbs. Okay? So repeating part or all of the stem is reduplication, and it can be used to create new words or to indicate inflectional categories of existing words. English actually has reduplication, and it's becoming more and more accepted that it's really part of the language. So let me give you an example. So this has been like 15, 20 years ago. I was on an email list, and one of the people on the email list said, "Okay, you know, we were talking about this sort of thing. So yeah, you know, if I had it with my kids, and go, fine, we're gonna go to a restaurant. Can't get to it. We're just gonna go to a restaurant." All the kids jump up and down. Yay, McDonald's! No, a restaurant. What does that mean?
Sit down.
Like an actual restaurant.
Sit down.
Real food.
Well, McDonald's is an actual restaurant, isn't it?
It's a sit-down restaurant.
Real food. It's not real.
Okay, you get the idea. It's when you go in, you're seated, somebody comes and asks what you would like to eat, you tell them, they go away, and 15 minutes later, they come back with your food, a restaurant.
So are you, in that particular case, it's indicating the original meaning of the restaurant, whereas not necessarily the streamlined fast food or modern version?
Yeah, it's what I call genuine reduplication, meaning that it's the genuine or prototype example of that. Okay? Another way you hear it used a lot is, well, do you like him? Well, I don't like him. Okay? What does that mean? And y'all know what it means, right? Okay, so there's another example, and we use this all the time. Okay? What's that?
Does it require air quotes?
It doesn't require air quotes, but it does require a certain kind of intonation. Okay, so you notice that, well, I don't like him. That doesn't work. I don't like him. There's a particular intonation curve that's required for this to work. But we have it. It's genuine. It's really there. It's part of English. And everybody who speaks English knows how to use it and knows what it means. Okay? So that's reduplication. All right? Say that. Okay. So, there's a bunch of other stuff I want to talk about, and I only got 5 minutes, so I think what I'll do is I'll just leave it at that and see if you have any remaining questions. Oh, I should say one more thing. You'll notice I haven't talked about writing systems, about fancy scripts or anything like that. Okay, not really my thing. I think it's interesting to look at and think about, and I've created my own scripts. They're not all that great, but it's kind of fun. For linguists, when we investigate language, it's really the spoken language that's primary. Okay? And whatever writing system we plan to impose on that language is secondary. Okay? So while I would have been involved in creating spelling systems for 2 Native American languages, it's not really what I do. It's kind of fun and it presents some interesting intellectual challenges, but really it's about what people say. So how I usually translate this for an audience like this is that before you go to town creating your fancy new script, be sure you understand how the language works. Okay? So until you have a good grasp of what the language is like and kind of some core principles of grammar and how it works, the script is just kind of an empty, hollow shell. Okay? It's all flash and no substance. Okay? And that's why I don't really talk about scripts all that often. And especially for a crowd like an LTUE where people are really worried about writing, getting their stuff published. I mean, editors really are kind of cranky when it comes to, oh yeah, I've got this fancy new writing system. Okay? So concentrate on the language. Think about what it sounds like. Think about grammatical categories you find interesting and how you're going to mark them. Okay? And make sure, above all, whatever depth of sophistication you go to in the language, just make sure it sounds like you want it to sound. I think for me, that's the most important thing. When I'm reading a novel or a story, and I come across a little blip in the language, I can spot immediately if that person's giving this any thought at all. Okay? You don't want to be, you don't want my kind of reader saying, whatever. Until you didn't think about this. You want to give it some thought. You want people to take you seriously. And one way to do this is to give this some thought, to think about how you can make the sound and the structure reflect what you want it to do. Okay? All right. I'm done talking, so unless you have questions, thank you for coming. I appreciate the questions you have and your attention.
Will you be here next year?
It depends on the committee. I'll put in a proposal. If they like it, I'll be here.
And can we email you with that email?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, if you have a copy of the handout already, my email is on the top there. Otherwise, just write it down. If you have questions, if you want to ask, you can get to now. Yeah.
I would like to know the rest of the languages on the sheet.
Oh, the rest of the language on the sheet. Okay. You ready? Language 1 is Hawaiian. Language 2 is Estonian. Didn't see that one coming, did you?
I've lived in Estonia for 3 years. I thought it looked familiar.
Yeah, there you go.
Where's Estonia?
It's across the bay from Finland.
Oh,
Yeah, it's the northernmost Baltic language. What was that? Yeah. Language number 3 is Nahuatl.
Where's that from?
N-A-U. It's classical Aztec. N-A-H-U-A-T. Language 4 is Armenian. We did that in field methods about 6 years ago.
Can you tell?
Language 5 is Shoshone. Language 6 is Farsi. Language 7 is Tamil. And language 8 it's Bahasa Indonesia. That's right. It's Indonesian. So now I'm going to have to come up with 8 new ones for next year.
Good luck.
Oh, one more thing. Sorry, I was going to recommend, if you are interested in doing this at all, these are 2 really, really good books that kind of step you through the process. Okay,
What are they
similar
called?
to what we did today. This one's called The Art of Language Invention by David Peterson. He did the language for Game of Thrones. Okay, he's a friend of mine. He's a really good guy. It's a really fun book to read. Okay, I really, really like the end of chapter vignettes where he talks about, being in the biz and doing things, with language and people he's worked with. This one is by Mike Rosenfelder, The Language Construction Kit. Okay, it's a little more sober, but really, really good stuff. It's well written, very well put together. He has a website called Zompist where he took most of this stuff
What's his name?
Mark Rosenfelder. Okay? There are 2 other books. So this is the language construction kit. Then there's advanced language construction and what he calls the Lexipedia. Okay? All about creating new languages and fleshing them out with lots of realistic stuff. So these are, I would recommend either of these books if you wanted to kind of pursue this a little more.
All right, thank you.